Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and Giallo enthusiasts. This is Tanner Leeser, your host for all things Giallo here on The King in Giallo. Our next stop on our journey through Giallo cinema is the second Giallo film from Riccardo Freda, The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire, released in 1971. In this video, I will do a deep dive overview, then segue into a full review and Gialli tally. The overview will be spoiler-free, the review and Gialli tally will not. Here is The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire. Overview. The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire is an Italian, French, and West German co-production. The film is directed by Riccardo Freda, billed as Willy Perito, who also co-wrote the film along with Alessandro Continenza, supposedly based on a novel by Richard Mann. Music is by Stelvio Cipriani. The cast is comprised of Luigi Pistilli as Detective John Norton, Dagmar Lassander as Helen Sobieski, Anton Diffring as Ambassador Sobieski, Valentina Cortese as Mrs. Sobieski, Renato Romano as Mandel, Arthur O'Sullivan as Inspector Lawrence, Dominique Boschero as the ambassador's mistress, and Werner Pochath as Mark Sobieski. The plot takes place in Dublin in the wake of a murder of a mistress of a Swiss ambassador who is discovered in the trunk of his car. The inspector on the case has every reason to assume the ambassador is the killer, but because of diplomatic immunity, he is unable to parse through the legal red tape in order to conduct an investigation and prove his theory. Detective John Norton is then brought in to circumvent the legal barriers and find justice. Norton once had a prestigious position leading the homicide task force, but was discharged disgracefully for his propensity for violence during his interrogations, which resulted in the death of a suspect. The trail takes some wild twists and turns, and ultimately leads to himself and his family being put in the crosshairs. After Freda's 1969 proto-giallo, Double Face, he would begin to slip up and lose his way in his cinematic endeavors. His follow-up film being an Italian, West German, and Israeli co-production, La Salamandra del Deserto, that he hardly even directed, which would become a more and more common thing for the director to do, to the point that he would disown some of his later films, Iguana with the Tongue of Fire being the first one to disown. This Giallo is mostly uninspired, unless you include going for a post-Argento's Bird with the Crystal Plumage styled cash grab. Freda claims he didn't complete the directing on this picture, and the pseudonym he dons for this film is one he would never use before nor after. He writes, directs, and edits the film, but quite honestly, none of these jobs he performs nearly approaches the same level he had done for Double Face or his earlier films. Being set in Ireland is an interesting choice, but Freda doesn't utilize the scenic location. Some directors overdo it. Freda leaves us wishing for more here. We have a digression in the plot to Switzerland, which just adds minutes to the running time, but hurts the pacing. Not like the pacing was good to begin with. The makeup and special effects range anywhere from unconvincing to hilariously bad, plus some directing and editing choices make for some unintentionally humorous scenes. The screenplay was said to be adapted from a Richard Mann novel called Room Without a Door, but in reality, it is very possible that this title and this person are entirely fabrications created to give the impression that this movie had more culture attached to it, for it is based on a book, don't you know? The writing, particularly in the dialogue, is atrocious and ridiculous.
I seem to suggest that it might have been a woman. Isn't it possible?
Certainly, it is possible. The use of vitriol does suggest a woman's hand, or a colored person's. They're expert at such things.
Mr. Joe, what's the problem? It's that new singer. She's dead in her dressing room.
Excuse me, I'm a doctor. Maybe I can help.
No, I think it's too late. Anyway, you better come with me.
Are we going to have it off in the bushes or on the bike?
It's damp in the bushes.
The police will never find him. Never. He's too clever. Much too clever.
But to be fair, they justify the animal title
You know, I remember once in Brazil, I stepped on an iguana hidden among the jungle foliage. This murderer, too, is certainly living amongst us, perhaps under our very eyes. You know, the iguana is clever at disguising himself. The only difference is that the iguana, though horrible, is harmless, while our murderer is probably pleasant to look at, but he cuts throats and uses vitriol. It's his tongue of fire, you might say.
Yeah, let's say that. The ending is surely surprising and over the top in some of the most fun ways. Does it save the movie, though? I mean, I'll let you decide. Despite the directing and editing overall severely underperforming, the soundtrack is pretty good. I mean, Stelvio Cipriani is one of the great Giallo composers, so at least he showed up to work. Although, some of the music was recycled from his work this same year on Bay of Blood, which would come out in the coming months. The cast is full of Giallo veterans, and they're also doing pretty well. Luigi Pistilli finally stars in a Giallo role, and he does not disappoint. His character is in the vein of a Dirty Harry type cop, although nowhere near that caliber. But however, it seems his character is partially inspired by a real-life event. Giuseppe Pinelli was an anarchist who was detained in connection to the bombing of the Bank of Agriculture on December 12, 1969 in Piazza Fontana. 3 days later, on the 15th, Giuseppe would die by falling out of the 4th-story window of the room he was being interrogated in, taking his own life. Or so that is what the interrogating officer said, but many do believe that he was tossed through the window. Anton Diffring is well cast as the bastard ambassador. He was a German actor born in 1918 who had ironically fled the Nazis only to end up being typecast as Nazi characters over and over again in English films. He is best known by the horror community for The Man Who Could Cheat Death, 1959 by Terence Fisher, Circus of Horrors, 1960 by Sidney Hayers, and Faceless, 1988 by Jess Franco. But beyond horror films, he also worked with renowned filmmakers like François Truffaut in Fahrenheit 451, 1966, and Ken Russell in Valentino, 1977. He was also in the infamously controversial, unreleased film by Jerry Lewis, The Day the Clown Cried, 1972, a dramedy set in the Nazi death camps. In Iguana, he steals the scenes and his performance surely is memorable. He passed away in 1989. Valentina Cortese is good enough, but her role offers her little to do. Dagmar Lassander is stunning as always. Frida would make one more Giallo film in 1981, Murder Obsession. But I digress. On to the review. Spoilers ahead for those of you who haven't yet seen the film. You've been warned. My prediction for the movie's Jolly Tally score. I feel more comfortable with these predictions, and I base this on nothing. I don't see this movie jumping into the top 3, but I imagine it will do alright. Let's say 550 to 600 points. Really, I'm feeling somewhere in the 500s in general. Well, let's begin the Jolly Tally and review portion of the video, beginning as always with the previewing cliches. The repeat offenders are 1 point for actor, 3 for writer, 3 for composer, and 5 for director. Luigi Pistilli was in The Case of the Scorpion's Tail and The Sweet Body of Deborah, 2 points. Dagmar Lassander was in Hatchet for the Honeymoon and The Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, 2 points. Werner Pochath was in The Cat o' Nine Tails, 1 point. Dominique Boschero was in Libido, 1 point. Valentina Cortese was in The Possessed and The Girl Who Knew Too Much, 2 points. Renato Romano was in The Bird with the Crystal Plumage and Death Laid an Egg, 2 points. André Tranquet, an uncredited writer of dialogue in this film, wrote A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, 3 points. Stelvio Cipriani composed for Human Cobras, 3 points. And Riccardo Frida wrote Double Face and directed Double Face, 3 and 5, 8 points. Cliché points for the title. The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire. Iguana, animal, 5 points. The Blank with the Blank, 5 points. Tongue, body part, 5 points. First Look, 25 points for the Italian director, and an additional 15 points for the movie releasing during the golden age of Giallo cinema. And would you look at that, It is plot o'clock. Damn it, I understand we're in Dublin, but do we have to freeze? Cold open, 5 points. Foreign locales, Dublin, 5 points. Urban locales, 2 points. Z is for Zoom, 5 points. G is for gloves, extra points for them being black, 10 points. We receive the opening title and immediately see that we are in Dublin. We see the city. First person POV, 5 points. It's nice to see Manuel is still alive and well after Dr. Braun's tragic death. We take in the city a little bit more, kind of focusing on this person on a motorbike, then we segue to this quaint little cottage. We observe this woman, close up on a door handle or creeping through an ajar door, 5 points. This unknown person breaks in and spies on the woman from the shadows. She goes upstairs and makes a call. T is for telephone, 5 points. She is unable to find a connection and soon finds the line has been cut. At that moment, the intruder cuts the lights. After a brief search, she finds the stalker, whom she might recognize. It's not entirely clear, just before they toss acid in the woman's face. I am going to graciously add E is for eyeballs, 5 points. Extra points for Z is for zoom for a zoom on eyes, 5 points. And no! Y is for yelling. Extra points for a hysterical woman yelling, 10 points. We watch as the razor cuts her throat. Cut then to outside this villa. Art featured, 5 points. Trust me, there's a wall later that is just covered in huge paintings. It's truly remarkable. The chauffeur parks and his riders walk out. We are acquainted with Valentina Cortez's questionable Swedish accent.
If I didn't know that my husband was not in Dublin, I would have thought that he was the author of such a miracle.
Let's face it, I'm tired.
The driver mentions running late because he had an earlier errand. They hand him parcels to place in the trunk, but he suggests it might be better for them to ride shotgun with him. The wife raises a stink about the driver not being professional, as little Baron over here sneaks round and unlocks the trunk. We see sunglasses sitting on the seat and get this intense stinger.
Mandel, stop first.
Interesting.
So I think we saw sunglasses on the killer, but hell if I know, the lighting was worse than the Battle of Winterfell. C is for children, 5 points. The boy opens the trunk and finds the dead girl. Animals featured, crow, 2 points. Extra points for Z is for zoom for a zoom on a dead victim, 5 points. Okay, I don't like tallying nudity if the person isn't actually nude, but something tells me with the way YouTube has been acting recently that I'll need to blur this regardless. So, N is for nudity, 5 points. The family and driver all look to each other. We see this ring once more. Odd clue, 5 points. We cut forward as the body is being removed. The wife makes a call, which is then intercepted by her husband, the ambassador, whom she thought was in Switzerland. He tells the person on the line that he returned to Dublin last night. He hangs up and tells his wife not to concern herself with this and to forget it. He explains that he came back last night and that he didn't visit Mark in Zurich. He tells his wife to have the police called. In walks this man. He says he's a doctor. The wife called him. This is Dr. Johnson, and while we're at it, Mr. and Mrs. Sobieski. I'm going to pause right now to highlight to you. I want you to notice how often the movie tries to suggest certain people are red herrings, and beyond that, tries to hit you over the head that they are, I'm not sure how to put it, more deserving of suspicion.
Do you think it is possible to recognize this person?
I would say it's impossible. The murderer has done a perfect job. A specialist, I would say, like me.
Interesting.
The doctor says it is impossible to tell who the victim is. We cut again, this time to Inspector Lawrence, and that's Lawrence spelled L-A-W to emphasize the law. He receives information on the murdered woman.
This must be the woman who was in the boot of the Rolls-Royce.
Really? Well, was there nothing else? Not even a letter?
What did you expect? The murderer's name and address, and an invitation to drop by for tea between 5 and 6?
No, but you never know.
Oh yeah, I'm also going to highlight moments in this movie that are just bad. In the car, we have more cheap dialogue pointing out that because Sobieski is an ambassador, they will be unable to pull him in for questioning.
I'd like to see him try and stop us.
And so Lawrence will have to find alternative means to get to the bottom of this. He goes on to say that he doesn't care if he is seen as having unorthodox methods. Exposition dumping, 2 points. Cut back to Sobieski at his villa.
Give her a good rub down.
I hope he means a wash. Sobieski is informed that Inspector Lawrence is here. He goes to meet with him. They sit down to talk just before Sobieski kind of bullies this man to go fetch his cigar and matches. As someone who has a freaking movie review show where I cover movies I just watched while smoking cigars, shameless plug, I'm willing to bet that that cigar box is Romeo y Julieta's, which I have stated are among my top 3 cigar brands, and the first one I fell in love with. Sobieski tells Lawrence he intends to collaborate with the police and not hide behind his diplomatic immunity. Q is for questions, 5 points.
Did you know that woman?
Interesting.
Which woman?
I meant the one that was in...
Oh, the one who was in the luggage boot of my car.
Sobieski says the victim was unrecognizable to him. We then get this wonderful exchange.
You think the man who killed her...
Or woman?
What makes you think the murder might be a woman?
I simply suggest that it might have been a woman. Isn't it possible?
Certainly, it is possible. The use of vitriol does suggest a woman's hand, or a colored person's. They're expert at such things.
Lawrence says he's grateful for the suggestion. Sobieski assumes that the staging of the cadaver in his trunk is likely to stir up a scandal. Lawrence asks if he can question the embassy staff, and Sobieski obliges him, so long as they are called into the police station. The inspector says he would like to speak with the chauffeur and the governess. As they walk out, we see the butler, Jerry, or whatever his title is, slink out from this false bookshelf. In a brief scene, we learn that Mandel, the chauffeur, is being interrogated, and that this woman, the governess, has no intentions of revealing any private life information about the ambassador to the police. Mandel tells them he suffers from conjunctivitis, and this is why he wears shades so often.
Interesting.
He tells them he went to the pictures last night, then returned and locked up the car. A is for alibi, 5 points. They press him. The governess told them that the morning of the discovery, Mandel seemed to be in a rush, and like he was showing up from somewhere else, and he admits that he went to the cleaners beforehand. They provide him receipts from the cleaners. They imply he may have been getting dirty clothes cleaned. They release him but urge him to keep his facts straight with them. As he goes to leave, he lets on that he might have something more to say, but says never mind, and exits. Cut then to Sobieski cutting a check to this young man, telling him begrudgingly that this is the last time. I was right about those cigars, by the way. He kicks the kid out, then exits himself. As he goes out, someone comes down, who I doubt they could have realistically been hidden. The person inspects the checkbook, then proceeds to the hidden door. It is Jerry once again. We watch the young man exit the building, get in this car, and present the check to Homeboy here. He remarks that the old man is getting cheaper every day, then they drive off. Sobieski remarks to his wife that he paid him, but it will be the last time, and then we learn that the driver is Mark, Mrs. Sobieski's son from a previous marriage. Sobieski says the sooner he returns to Switzerland, the better, and storms out. We are now at this establishment. Sobieski's daughter Helen is here sitting with this chap as Luigi Pistilli's character watches her from over at the bar. The woman singing at the piano goes to leave after her song, hesitates, but continues. I'm ashamed to admit that I didn't recognize that this was Sobieski in disguise when I first watched it. U is for undercover, 5 points.
It doesn't require much imagination to find a back entrance.
That's what I'm saying. Sobieski pays this woman, which seems to have been an ongoing thing, but she says that she'll need more money, and he asks what if he refuses, and she responds that she wouldn't recommend that. Helen gets up to go to the bathroom, presumably, has an awkward exchange with the man at the bar, is spied on by the doctor as she goes out, and then we see the man she was sitting with steal money out of her wallet. We then get this unintentionally funny bit I showed earlier.
Mr. Joe, what's the problem? It's that new singer. She's dead in her dressing room.
Excuse me, I'm a doctor. Maybe I can help.
No, I think it's too late. Anyway, you better come with me.
We find the singer dead on the floor with her throat slashed.
Focus!
The killer shuts the lights off and plunges the bar into chaos. As Helen runs out the back door, she is called to by the man from the bar, John, who offers her a ride, defending his motorbike as the only car she'll see that isn't a paddy wagon. On the ride, she asks why he is helping her, and he is rather cryptic.
Do you want to hear my life story?
He drops her off, says this.
Are we going to have it off in the bushes or on the bike?
It's damp in the bushes.
Then she invites him in, after admitting that this is where the murder was discovered. She brings him upstairs and hands him a whiskey. As he sips, Helen is called in to speak with her father. We cannot hear them, but Mr. Sobieski seems irritated at something. Perhaps his daughter bringing one-night stands in and out of his villa? John inspects the ashtray, which he notices has a lot of the same cigars filling it. Which, by the way, those are not Romeo y Julieta cigars, contrary to the box. Helen returns, tells John that her father will not smoke any other brand, although she's never known him to finish one of them. He says he can't stand them himself, as he puffs on his little cigarette. She leads him up to her room as Jerry watches them go upstairs. As Helen gets freshened up, John makes a call. We are not sure at this moment who he is calling, but we know whoever they are, they read Agatha Christie. Helen returns to him, nude. They are in bed, hardcore smooching. Necking, 5 points. We then follow Mendel. He goes into this cafe and receives money from the young man from earlier, while being spied upon outside by Mark. We then see John at home as the phone rings. That solves that mystery of who he was calling. He tells his mother to answer the phone, but her hearing is apparently as bad as her sight. In walks John's daughter as well, who is asked to help find her grandmother's glasses. Apparently, she is keen to take them off, even though she admits that she can't see anything without them. Okay, kinda dumb. Immediately, she takes them off. Okay, kinda dumb. She thinks she's Miss Marple and tells John that she believes that she has solved the murders based off of the few newspaper clippings. She reminds him that she reads a lot of Agatha Christie, so that means that she is more qualified than her son, a homicide detective. She informs John that the killer is certainly the son of the ambassador, aka Mark, unless she means the little Baron-looking kid. Which, come on movie, are you spoiling the reveal or not? Curious that the movie seems to go out of its way to imply everybody else, but all the scenes with Mark have given ample cause to suspect him. We follow John as he sneaks into the first victim's cottage. We have some terrible lighting, which I would like to say that this same technique was done to a much better effect in Frida's last giallo, Doubleface, but here it is so obviously a spotlight. John searches and searches. The photo that previously held a picture of Sobieski is now blank, but the ashtray is full of his cigars, as well as a burnt-up note. John begins to go upstairs, but stops when he hears footsteps outside. The unknown person enters the cottage, but John flanks them and commands them to get their hands up. Suddenly, John is attacked from behind. The two people attack him, one of which appears to be the officer working with Lawrence. Again, the low lighting makes everything appear like the Battle of Winterfell. The scuffle lasts a couple of minutes, but is damn challenging to discern what is actually happening. John at one point gains the upper hand, begins choking the officer, but is pistol whipped. Cut to John in handcuffs being brought in before Inspector Lawrence, who takes one look, then offers John a whiskey. The officers are flabbergasted and commanded to uncuff him. Lawrence reveals that John is his unorthodox method he spoke of. He tells John that things haven't changed much, to which he retorts that Lawrence means to say back when John was like him, a detective. We see a flashback of John interrogating a suspect rather violently. He humorously beats the man's ass, demanding him to talk. He takes a breather, giving the suspect a moment to snatch John's gun and...
I'm doing it! It is!
I can't believe that just fucking happened!
Is it dead?
John confesses that he doesn't know why he is so hyper-violent, but supposes it is because of his wife's murder and that he must have a propensity to assume every suspect is guilty. Inspector Lawrence then gives his terrible iguana speech.
You know, I remember once in Brazil, I stepped on an iguana hidden among the jungle foliage. This murderer, too, is certainly living amongst us, perhaps under our very eyes. You know, the iguana is clever at disguising himself. The only difference is that the iguana, though horrible, is harmless, while our murderer is probably pleasant to look at, but he cuts throats and uses vitriol. It's his tongue of fire, you might say.
Lawrence then tells John to keep on seeing the ambassador's daughter because it is their best option to learn more about the ambassador himself. He adds for John to not get into too much trouble. John thanks him for the job, then leaves to get his head stitched up. At the doctor's now, let's play a game and add every time the doctor is made to be suspicious. 1. He kicks out the nurses. 2. 3.
Interesting.
4. He picks up a razor. 5.
You think that they will find the embassy murderer?
6.
The
police will never find him. Never. He's too clever. Much too clever.
7.
Interesting.
8. The doctor shaves the back of John's head and then begins stitching it closed. This, more than any amount of gore in any of these films, makes me cringe. Okay, no less than 8 instances of gesturing to the audience. Either this movie is heavy-handed with tipping who the killer might be, or they are trying too hard to make the doctor the prime red herring. As John goes in to see Helen, he passes by this smarmy little punk from the club scene. The young man knows John by name. This is Walter. He mentions how John stole his girlfriend and that everybody knows him as ex-detective John Norton, the Brute. He then closes by asking this.
Doesn't it ever occur to you that sooner or later one of your victims might try to do you?
John tells him off. F is for fashion, 5 points. I like both their outfits, but John's look in particular is one of my favorites. I would rock those 3 pieces. John walks in and is hit on by Helen's mother, Mrs. Sobieski, who is high as a frickin' kite. Illicit drugs taken, 5 points. She tells him that her husband has gone back to Switzerland, leaving her alone as always. She is certainly an odd one, and she reminds me of Carlo's mother in Deep Red. She flirts, she reminisces of the past, and she tells him of her children, Mark from the previous one, and the new children from her husband. Helen rescues John from her mother. They leave as Mrs. Sobieski takes another hit of opium. In walks her husband. L is for lies, 5 points. He mentions John is a pain in his ass, but she says she likes him and that at least he's not boring. He points out that her addiction is affecting her brain, and he reminds her of the predicament he saved her from in the past. She admits that this is true, but that he has gotten to where he is in life by bowing to others while bossing others around, including his whores, and she asserts that she will not be pushed around anymore. He threatens to break her neck, but she tells him that he won't dare lift a finger to her. He has no idea how far she can go. He says,
"You bitch. You fucking bitch. Bitch.
Typical 1970s Italian misogyny, woman is called a bitch. 3 points. We cut to a bathhouse with several of the male characters. Jerry, Walter, and this balding bastard, Mark. Mark and Jerry say they're both busy tonight. Jerry is upset that both men are bailing out of his arrangements. Walter tells Jerry to calm down, for what will he do about it? If he tries anything, his face will get knocked in.
Interesting.
Cut to the Irish countryside and the cliffs of Moher. Jerry is spying on John and Helen as they walk along and talk. He asks her if she knew her father was having an affair with the girl found in the trunk. She says no, and he informs Helen that her father was also going with the singer from the club. He takes note of her not being surprised, and she says he's always gone after women. Through their conversation, she says that her father knows of John and he wasn't too pleased when she brought him over. She goes on to ask why he quit being a detective. Cue another flashback.
Is it dead?
John looks out over the cliffs. Helen asks what the matter is. He then clutches her throat for like 20 seconds.
Interesting.
Then he kisses her. Damn movie, stop trying so hard to make everyone look guilty. I know I'm jumping the gun, but this is something the movie Torso did really well. We discover that Jerry has been murdered with a sign that says, "Just learn not to be too curious." Well, he can't, because he's dead. Brief scene of Lawrence reading all the newspapers which are printing the 1970s equivalent of clickbait, but all agree that the police are incompetent. Cut now to John in a pub. He receives from the barkeep a beer, plus a note from someone who was inquiring about him. The message is formed in an identical fashion to the one we just saw in Jerry's car. This one says, "If you want to know more about that bitch Helen, go to the Red Tower house." John arrives and peruses the house. I'd like to point out that for all of this movie's faults, this soundtrack is great. As he ascends the stairs, someone down on the ground floor begins to slip out from a door. John bursts into a room, lets in some light, and finds Walter dead, staged with flowers adorning his corpse. He He finds the same lighter that Mrs. Sobieski was using earlier.
Interesting.
Then here's a car taking off. In the car seems to be a fair-haired woman. There is nothing funny about this next scene, and if you think there is, you need to grow up.
My precious pussy. That's right, my pussy. That's my puss.
Grow up! John's mother finds a bloody razor in the medicine cabinet.
Interesting.
We watch the door slide open as someone enters into the domicile. Oh, it's just John. She asks John about the razor, and he confirms that it is his and that he cut himself shaving. Okay, movie, now you're just wasting our time. She brings up the new murder and warns John that his suspicions are likely towards Mrs. Sobieski, which would be false. She says no one would be so dumb as to leave such incriminating evidence behind. It is to fool the police. She says the murderer is the little boy. Okay, so perhaps I was mistaken when she said earlier that it was the ambassador's son. I mean, they're both his sons. John's daughter arrives and opens the fridge, and we find her granny's pussy inside. Animals killed, 5 points. We are now in Switzerland. John arrives and inquires about Helen, then meets her in the bar. She says she is with her brother Mark and a friend of his. He inquires about needing to speak with her father, and she says that he's out bobsledding. We watch him bobsled right up until he doesn't. So he's dead? Oh, I guess not. He hurt his leg. Okay, I would have guessed he snapped his collarbone. Sobieski warns John that he intends on hiding behind his diplomatic immunity regarding the murders. He passes John one of his cigars, only for John to mention that ascertaining these specific cigars was his sole reason for traveling to Switzerland, and Sobieski has had enough. John halts him by informing him that his bobsled was sabotaged. Sobieski seems surprised, but knows John will do what he will with that information. John then asks Helen about the house he found Walter killed in. She tries to deny it, but he says that her dresses were in the closet, plus the lighter, and that Walter's body was covered in flowers. She tells him not to throw accusations at her, to which he warns her that he will return to Dublin and solve this mystery. John walks away, then finds a note left on a door by Mark saying that he will be out till 5 p.m. John is back in Dublin, almost like we didn't even need those scenes in Switzerland. This butler tells John that Mrs. Sobieski has tried to take her life just now. John runs into the bathroom and finds her in the tub with a gash on her throat. The eye flutter here made me crack up the first time I saw this. Oh, just shut up and let me die, would you? He orders the butler to call the ambulance. Just then, John finds a dark shard on the floor. John meets with Mandel in a pub. Mandel tells him that Sobieski let him go because of his conjunctivitis, but hasn't paid him what he is owed. He warns that Sobieski will rue the day. He was released 20 days ago and is now penniless. His discharge falls after the murder.
Interesting.
Mandel says that someone gave him a shove when he was coming off the bus and that this is how his glasses broke. John offers to take them to get them fixed. Next, he visits Mrs. Sobieski in the hospital. He asks her why she did it, but she says she didn't, that someone tried to kill her. He asks her who it was, but she begins to weep, and then the nurse kicks John out. Lawrence has confirmation that the shard is from the same broken pair of glasses, but John isn't satisfied with this. The inspector sends his man on an assignment who fumbles with leaving. I should have done it earlier, but useless police, 2 points. Lawrence asks John why he doesn't believe the evidence. John reasons because of his mother's logic. We cut to Mandel, who makes an urgent call to Detective John Norton. Mandel says he went to get his money. We see someone creep in while he talks. He says he saw Mrs. Sobieski's attacker. He says he cannot say who because he fears for his life, but he suspects that John should have known who from early on. Just then, Mandel is attacked and killed. Cut to John's house as the doorbell rings. His mother goes to answer it. It is Helen. She came to speak with John.
I know everything about you.
Everything?
Yes?
She invites Helen in. As she goes to make coffee, Helen begins snooping around the house. John makes a call, which is answered by Mark's friend. John inquires for Mark, and the man pretends to look and see if he is available. He tells John that Mark must be out. John hangs up, and we get this unnecessary love scene for no reason at all. Helen leaves. Moments later, John's mother is scared by his daughter, who warns her grandmother she cannot hear anything when she doesn't have her glasses on. The grandmother says she's not worried with the cop they have posted outside to guard the house. Helen waves down a taxi, but the car nearly hits her. The door opens and acid is tossed at Helen. She runs and the killer gives chase. Foot chase, 5 points. Helen runs to this bridge, but it begins to go up. She leaps and grabs the other end as she dangles above the water. She loses her grip and plunges into the cold water. We then see a doctor examining her. Cut to Mark's friend in a car conducting a lookout outside of John's home. The posted cop walks away and he gives the all clear to this woman, presumably Helen, who gets out. John's mother lets in the figure, whom she addresses as Helen, and talks to her. But Helen doesn't respond and she's always hiding her face. But as this film has repeatedly hammered into our heads, we all know John's mother can't see anything without her glasses. As John's mother goes to make coffee, Helen walks into this room where John's daughter is lying under a sun lamp. The killer's identity is hidden due to the framing and editing, 2 points. The figure attacks the girl. The acid is withdrawn, but it is fumbled and dropped. As the girl screams out, we see John's mother with coffee looking confused. But as this film has repeatedly hammered into our heads, we all know John's mother can't hear anything without her glasses. She enters the room and is attacked. Outside, we see John enter after shooting the shit with the guard. Inside, the attack continues. The old lady is throttled and beaten against the bed frame. John enters and establishes order. He stops Helen, whom he attempts to slap out of her fit. The shades fly off, and John realizes this is not Helen, but her brother, Mark. Hidden identity of the killer until the final moments, 5 points. Someone else is believed to be the killer, aka mistaken identity, 5 points. John lays the smackdown on Mark. As the struggle goes on, we see the flashback once again.
Is it dead?
Mark pulls a straight razor and begins slashing. Look at these terrible effects. John gains the upper hand and turns the tides. More bad effects. As John goes to check on his mother, Mark regains himself, attempting to attack the girl, but she calls out to her father. Terrified, the killer jumps out the window. Here's one final bad effect. He lands on the car outside. Someone dies by falling to their death. 15 points. The killer commits suicide or dies accidentally. Falling. 10 points. John and Lawrence are speaking with Sobieski, who tells them that Mark was always resentful and hateful of others and everything they had, and that he tried to destroy the Sobieski family and their reputation. He says Mandel, the chauffeur, found out and was trying to blackmail Mark. They ask about Helen, whom he tells them is in Paris and will join the family later. Sobieski boards a boat. John tells Lawrence that Sobieski was the one who actually committed the first murder of the girl they found in his car. That killing set off Mark's murder obsession while Sobieski hid behind his diplomatic immunity. But once he arrives in Switzerland, he will be arrested by the police there. The two detectives walk off, and we see Sobieski visibly bothered to the degree that he cannot enjoy his cigar anymore. Perhaps he knows the jig is up. Before we go, let's add S is for secrets. Extra points if the killer has an impossible to predict motivation. 10 points. O is for obsession. Extra points if the killer or sleuth are obsessed. 10 points. I is for infidelity. Extra points for a murder or blackmail occurring after the fact. 10 points. Extra points for L is for lies, for the killer lying about their alibi. 5 points. And extra points for T is for telephone if the killer makes a call. 5 points. And that's The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire. So let's be real. This movie is cheap as shit. Funny enough, I've seen a few horror and Giallo fans mention this film as being not good, as if every Giallo film they've seen is a landmark film. Quite frankly, I think this movie has some things going its way. I just feel it doesn't quite stick the landing, and the writing is a bit all over the place. But the bones of something pretty good are there. I think after a few rewrites, they might have had something on their hands. Let's segue to the Jolly Tally cliches for this movie. Post-Giallo viewing cliches. The reason for the killing. Mental illness, psychopathy, or obsession. 7 points. The reason for the investigation. Private investigator. 3 points. Bonus points. The style bonus. The movie has style, but nowhere near as much as Double Face did, which had some very gothic horror moments. This movie has a couple zooms, and yes, there are other elements beyond this that are utilized, but hell, they just are not done well. The movie also suffers from terrible low lighting, spotlighting, and in general just has a rushed vibe to it. Out of a max of 25 points possible, I will give Iguana 6 points for its style bonus. Compare that to Double Face, which had 20 points for its style bonus. Soundtrack. Hell yes, 15 points. Bad effects. Oh, this movie has enough bad effects for 3 Giallo films. 15 points. Final look. Extra points. The Deadpool tallying how many kills and deaths are featured in the film. I break it down as thus. 10 points per kill or death seen for the main Deadpool, plus any stylistic kill multipliers, which we didn't add yet, plus the knife kill bonus. We have Sobieski's mistress, burned with acid and throat slit. I am going to do something never done before. I will award both points for throat slit and burned. 25 points. The singer, throat slit, 17 points. John's interrogation suspect, gunshot, 10 points. Jerry, we don't see it happen, but throat slit and burned, 25 points. Walter, throat slit, 17 points. Pause here. The internet, and by this I mean Wikias and YouTube channels both dedicated to just counting the deaths and kills, not the channel Dead Meat though, all seem to be convinced that in the bobsled crash, 2 people die. So I went back to see if maybe I had mistaken something, and no, I am correct. The bobsledders are not 2 random people. One of them is, but the other one is certainly Mr. Sobieski, because we see him after the crash limping with a cane, and John tells him that someone sabotaged the bobsled to try to kill him, to which Sobieski responds with relief, for he thought his error had resulted in the crash. Suck it, internet, you are wrong. Anyways, whereas everybody else counted 2 deaths there, which cannot be the case because Sobieski was the driver, and technically speaking, we never are told that anybody died in this crash, but I will once again graciously count the other bobsledder despite there being no confirmation that they were killed. So, bobsledder, which I will count as vehicular, 19 points. Mendel, burned and throat slit, 25 points. And finally, Mark Sobieski, 10 points. Extended Deadpool for those other deaths mentioned but not seen, I'll give 3 points for each. None. Red herrings for the total number of legitimate suspects in the film. 5 points per legit suspect are awarded. We have Mr. Sobieski, Mandel, Helen, Mrs. Sobieski, Dr. Johnson, Mark, Jerry, Walter, and Mark's unnamed friend. I did consider Detective John, but I don't think they're trying to imply that he might be the killer. I think they're just trying to imply that he's unhinged, which, I mean, he is. 45 points for red herrings. Flashback sequences, 5 points each. We have 1, 2, and 3. 15 points for flashbacks. Nudity, I award 5 points for ass, 7 for breasts, and 10 for genitalia. We have breasts, 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 and breasts. 28 points for nudity. Ladies and gentlemen, for The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire, I awarded the film an AZ score of 15 out of 26. With the bonus points for these, we have a modified score total of 120 points. And for the full Jolly Tally score, I award The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire a Jolly Tally score of 579 points. Compared to Slaughter Hotel in first with 827 points, A Lizard in a Woman's Skin in second with 759 points, and The Case of the Scorpion's Tail in third with 741 points. The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire is in seventh, tied with A Quiet Place to Kill. I predicted between 550 and 600 points, so I got it this time. But like I always say, these points do not mean a movie is better or worse. Please like this video, share it with your friends if they are horror fans or cinephiles, subscribe to The King in Giallo if you haven't yet. If you have any questions, thoughts, curiosities, or concerns, leave those below in the comment section and I will get back to you. Give The King in Giallo a follow on Instagram and a like on Facebook. Subscribe to the King in Giallo Patreon to see early access to my videos, with some videos able to be seen up to over a month in advance, plus exclusive content found only there, such as the viewings, the King in Giallo podcast, the Giallo adjacent podcasts, Let's Plays for Giallo-inspired games, Giallo Read book reviews, and the Rat Hole Burn movie reviews. Next time on The King in Giallo will be the overview, review, and Jolly Tally for the third Giallo film from Dario Argento, Four Flies on Grey Velvet. Thank you very much for your continued support. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
I'm doing it. It is. I can't believe that just happened. Is it dead?